When a dismissive avoidant and you both stop contacting each other, something subtle begins to unfold. It doesn't start with fireworks, tears, or long goodbyes. It starts with silence. Not the dramatic kind that follows an argument, but the quiet that hums underneath everything. Two people, both carrying their own histories of pain, both protecting themselves in different ways, finally stop reaching out. No more late-night texts. No more half-hearted, "how are you" messages. Just stillness. At first, that silence feels final. It feels like loss. But what follows isn't the end. It's the beginning of a revelation. For both of you. Because when two people stop chasing, what's left behind isn't peace. It's truth. What silence means to the dismissive avoidant. For the dismissive avoidant, silence isn't absence. It's safety. It's the emotional equivalent of exhaling after holding their breath for too long. To understand their quiet, you have to understand their wiring. Most dismissive avoidants grew up in environments where emotional need was met with rejection, neglect, or dismissal. They learned, very young, that being too open led to pain. So they built walls and called them independence. Closeness to them feels like loss of control. Vulnerability feels like exposure. So when you stop contacting them, they don't immediately feel panic. They feel relief. No more pressure, they think. No expectations. No one needing more than I can give. For a while, they convince themselves that distance equals peace. But silence, left long enough, always becomes a mirror. And eventually, the mirror starts reflecting the very thing they fear most, their loneliness. When the silence echoes back, at first, the quiet is comfortable, predictable. They tell themselves they're fine. But as the days stretch into weeks, they start noticing what's missing. Not chaos, not conflict, but connection. They don't miss the constant messaging. They miss the feeling of being known. They miss the warmth in your tone, the predictability of your care. And yet pride keeps them from reaching out. Avoidants are allergic to emotional risk, so instead they hover at the edges of your world. They'll scroll your profile, watch your stories, like an old post. Little signals that say, "I'm still here," without ever admitting they care. To them, it's control. Contact without vulnerability. To you, it's confusion. Because while you've been learning to detach, they're beginning to feel the absence they once needed. Your side of the silence. For you, the silence feels different. It hits first like withdrawal. You were used to being the emotional bridge, the one holding the connection together. Every time they pulled away, you reached out. Every time they froze, you thawed the distance with patience. Now there's nothing to reach for. You check your phone more times than you'd like to admit. You replay old messages, wondering if maybe you were too much, or maybe not enough. This is the raw part, the part where your nervous system screams for contact. But here's what happens next. If you sit with that silence long enough, the panic fades, and clarity takes its place. You start realizing how much energy you've spent trying to keep something alive that was never fully mutual. You start noticing how much anxiety you called love. And slowly, piece by piece, you start returning to yourself. The silence, which once felt like abandonment, begins to feel like protection. The quiet becomes sacred, a space where you no longer have to fight for understanding. The energetic shift. What's fascinating is that avoidants sense emotional shifts before they see them. Even if you haven't posted a thing or sent a message, they can feel when your energy detaches. For them, your pursuit was proof. Proof that they mattered. Proof that they were still wanted despite their distance. When that proof disappears, An old buried panic begins to stir. At first, they rationalize it. They probably just got busy. They'll come back. But as silence stretches on, the certainty fades. They begin to wonder, did I lose control? Did I push too far? And that's the irony. The very distance they use to feel powerful eventually makes them powerless. The inner war of the avoidant. Inside every dismissive avoidant, there's a war between two desires, the need for connection and the fear of it. They long to be loved, but the moment love gets too close, it feels suffocating. They crave intimacy, but interpret it as danger. They want emotional safety, but don't trust that it exists. So when you used to chase them, it soothed their fear of abandonment. They knew you'd always return. But when you stop contacting them too, the old reassurance disappears. Now they're the one wondering where you went. And in that wondering, something profound happens. The mask slips. The avoidant who once seemed detached begins to feel curiosity, then confusion, then loss. Because avoidance only works when someone else keeps playing the game. Without the dance of pursuit and retreat, they're left alone with themselves, and that's the one place they've always avoided. The power of your detachment. Meanwhile, your silence evolves into something stronger, boundaries. What began as heartbreak turns into awareness. You start realizing that love shouldn't require self-abandonment. You start valuing your peace more than their potential. And that energetic shift, the one from chasing to centering, is magnetic. It doesn't just change how you feel, it changes how they perceive you. Because for the first time, you're no longer orbiting them. You've become your own center of gravity, and that's when the avoidant feels it most. The emotional space where your energy used to be. When they reappear. Avoidants rarely make grand returns. They don't come back with emotional apologies or clarity. Instead, they test. A light message. Hey, how have you been? A random meme. A comment on something unrelated. It's not casual. It's calculated. They're checking. Are you still there? Is the door still open? They're not ready for vulnerability, but they want reassurance. They're trying to confirm that the dynamic still exists, that you'll still chase. But here's where everything changes. You don't. When you respond, if you even choose to, it's calm, grounded, brief, no tension, no emotional hunger, no over-explaining. You've moved from needing their validation to understanding their pattern. And that understanding disarms their power completely. What silence teaches the avoidant. Your neutrality becomes louder than any message. Because this time, your silence isn't fueled by anger or hurt. It's rooted in self-respect. To the avoidant, that's disorienting. They can manage confrontation. They can ignore pleading. But they can't control peace. When you're no longer reactive, they lose the dynamic that made them feel safe. And in that void, they start feeling what they've been suppressing for years. Sadness, regret, loneliness. Some avoidants will face it. They'll reflect. They'll start asking deeper questions. Why does love always feel like danger to me? Why do I push away the people who care most? Your silence becomes the mirror that makes them finally see themselves. For others, the discomfort becomes too much. They'll run back into distractions, new partners, busyness, constant motion, anything to drown out the echo of what they've lost. But no distraction lasts forever. Eventually, the quiet returns, carrying the same lesson they refused to learn. Your evolution in the quiet. For you, the silence has become something different now. Not emptiness, but expansion. You've stopped obsessing over why they aren't texting. You've started noticing how peaceful your life feels without walking on emotional eggshells. You realize that missing someone doesn't mean you belong with them. You begin filling your world again. Hobbies, friends, passions, self-respect. You rediscover the version of yourself that existed before the cycle. And one day, you realize you haven't thought about checking your phone in weeks. That's the moment freedom begins. Time, the great revealer. Give silence enough time, and it stops being about them. It starts being about you. You start to see how much of your behavior was driven by a need to earn love, to prove you were enough. You recognize that you were not chasing a person. You were chasing validation. And in releasing them, you finally start giving that validation to yourself. Meanwhile, the avoidant begins to realize that avoidance isn't peace, it's isolation. That independence without intimacy isn't strength. It's loneliness wearing a mask. Sometimes, that realization leads to genuine growth. They reach out not from fear, but from awareness. Other times, they stay trapped in the pattern needing connection, but unable to risk it. Either way, your path diverges. When silence becomes healing. Here's the paradox. The silence that once felt unbearable becomes your greatest teacher. It teaches patience, the kind that doesn't wait for someone else, but listens to your own heart. It teaches boundaries, the kind that protects your peace without punishing anyone. It teaches love, the kind that begins within and radiates outward. Because true healing doesn't come from getting an avoidant to change. It comes from realizing you no longer need them to. What happens in the end? When a dismissive avoidant and you both stop contacting each other, what happens next is never just about who messages first. It's about who evolves. For the avoidant, it's an invitation to face their fear of vulnerability. For you, it's an invitation to remember your worth. Sometimes, silence leads to reconciliation when two people grow enough to meet in the middle. Other times, it becomes a gentle goodbye, not with resentment, but with understanding. And if you ever wonder whether they think of you, the answer is yes. But the deeper question is, do you think of you? Because the moment your focus shifts from their absence to your own presence, everything changes. You stop defining your value by who responds to your messages. You start defining it by how peaceful your heart feels when no one else is around. And that's when silence stops being emptiness, it becomes freedom. Freedom from patterns, freedom from anxiety, freedom from the endless chase for validation. You realize the silence between you wasn't punishment, it was preparation. Preparation for the day. You finally understand that love isn't about chasing someone afraid of closeness. It's about learning to stand so firmly in your own that fear can no longer move you. So if you're in that quiet space right now, wondering what happens next, remember this. Silence doesn't destroy real connections. It reveals which ones were strong enough to survive without chasing. And sometimes that revelation isn't tragic. It's liberating. Because maybe the point was never to make the avoidant come back, but to finally come back to yourself.